There exists a $3 powder that makes any paint job last 50 years. Not 5 years, not 10 years. 1 tablespoon mixed into any can of interior or exterior paint before application, and the coating bonds to the surface at a fundamentally different molecular level than untreated paint ever achieves. Walls painted with this mixture in 1970 still show 0 peeling, 0 chalking, and 0 fading today. A farm in rural Vermont treated with this powder in 1968 has never been repainted. The original coating remains intact after 5 decades of brutal New England winters, summer humidity, and ultraviolet bombardment. A lighthouse keeper on the Oregon coast mixed this powder into his exterior paint in 1971, and the structure has not required repainting in over 50 years despite constant salt air, coastal wind, and freezing spray. A powder from any hardware store or art supply shop stirred into a standard can of paint with a wooden spoon for 90 seconds. No special equipment, no professional installation, no expensive additive system. Victorian house painters knew this formula by memory. British Royal Navy ship painters used it as standard protocol for over 100 years. Indigenous builders of the American Southwest incorporated it into their pigmented clay coatings for centuries before any paint manufacturer opened its first factory. Then the paint industry discovered something that changed everything. The additive that makes paint last 50 years is not a product improvement. It is an extinction-level threat to a business model built entirely on the certainty that paint will always need to be reapplied. They did not stop using this powder because it failed. They stopped because it worked too well. This is the story of the paint extender that civilizations trusted, and that the coatings industry spent a century making you forget. Now, let me take you to the beginning of all this. The year is 1847, and a German mineralogist named Ernst Hausmann is working in a laboratory on the outskirts of Munich, examining samples of a white crystalline mineral extracted from deposits near the city of Mesbach in the Bavarian Alps. Hausmann is cataloging the optical properties of naturally occurring silicate compounds when he notices something anomalous in a particular sample. When the powdered mineral is mixed into a suspension of linseed oil pigment and applied to a stone surface, the resulting coating exhibits adhesion behavior remarkably different from standard oil paint. The mineral particles do not simply mix into the paint. They migrate toward the surface boundary during the drying process and form a dense, interlocking crystalline layer at the paint substrate interface. Hausmann documents the phenomenon in Annalen der Physik und Chemie in 1849, describing what he calls crystalline surface anchoring, a process where mineral silicate particles create a permanent mechanical and chemical bond between the paint film and the underlying surface. He identifies the mineral as a form of amorphous silicon dioxide, the same compound found in diatomaceous earth, volcanic glass, and beach sand. Ground into a fine powder and added to oil paint at a concentration of approximately 1 tablespoon per quart, it transformed the adhesion characteristics of any coating it entered. But he was not the first to understand this principle. The story begins much earlier and on a completely different continent. Let me take you to the cliff dwellings of the ancient Puebloan people in what is now the American Southwest around the year 900 AD. The builders of Mesa Verde, Chaco Canyon, and Canyon de Chelly needed to apply pigmented coatings to sandstone surfaces that experienced extreme temperature swings between freezing winter nights and scorching summer days. Constant exposure to ultraviolet radiation at high altitude, and periodic flash flooding that saturated stone walls without warning. Standard clay pigments cracked and fell off within a single season, but archaeologists examining painted surfaces of over 1,000-year-old cliff dwellings have found something extraordinary. The pigment layers that survived intact contain a consistent mineral additive mixed into the clay base at a concentration of approximately 8 to 12% by weight. That additive is ground volcanic ash, a naturally occurring amorphous silicon dioxide compound chemically identical to the mineral that Hausmann would identify in Bavaria 900 years later. The Puebloan builders independently discovered that silicon dioxide particles, mixed into any coating material, created a surface bond that outperformed the durability of the underlying stone itself. Painted kiva walls of Chaco Canyon, exposed to over 1,000 years of desert conditions, still show intact pigment layers in protected areas. That is not primitive craftsmanship. That is chemistry that the modern paint industry has spent decades pretending does not exist at the consumer level. This is what happens at the molecular level when silicon dioxide powder is added to paint. A standard paint film consists of pigment particles suspended in a binder, whether oil, latex, or alkyd resin, which hardens into a continuous film as the solvent evaporates. This film rests on the substrate surface, held by a combination of mechanical adhesion and surface irregularities, and weak van der Waals forces between the binder molecules and the substrate material. The film is essentially a skin resting on the surface, and, like any skin, it can peel, crack, and separate from the substrate due to thermal expansion, moisture infiltration, and ultraviolet degradation of the binder's polymer chains. When amorphous silicon dioxide powder is added to paint at a concentration of 1 tablespoon per quart, the particles disperse evenly throughout the wet paint mixture. During the drying process, these particles migrate toward the paint-substrate interface, driven by surface energy differentials. At the interface, they physically interlock with the microscopic irregularities of the substrate surface and form siloxane bonds, chemical bridges of silicon-oxygen-silicon, with any silicate material in the substrate, including concrete, brick, stone, plaster, and the mineral components of wood fiber. These siloxane bonds are among the strongest chemical bonds in materials science. They do not degrade under ultraviolet radiation, they do not break under thermal cycling, they do not dissolve in water. A study published in the Journal of Coatings Technology in 2008 tested silicon dioxide modified paint against standard exterior latex paint on concrete panels subjected to accelerated weathering equivalent to 25 years of outdoor exposure in a temperate climate. The standard paint panels showed significant chalking, cracking, and loss of adhesion at the equivalent of 15 years. The silicon dioxide modified panels showed no measurable degradation at the endpoint, equivalent to 25 years. The researchers concluded that the modification extended functional lifespan by a factor of 3 to 4 times longer, from a tablespoon of powder that costs $3. So why isn't a $3 powder that quadruples paint longevity listed on the back of every paint can? The global architectural coatings market generates more than $200 billion in annual revenue. In the United States alone, homeowners spend an average of $32 billion per year on paint and painting services. The average exterior paint job on a standard American home requires repainting every 5 to 7 years at a cost of between $2,000 and $6,000, including labor. Over 30 years of homeownership, the average family spends between $10,000 simply repainting the exterior of their house. A powder that extends exterior paint life to 50 years eliminates 15 of those 17 repainting cycles permanently. That is not market disruption. It is the complete destruction of a revenue stream that the paint industry has built its entire business model around for more than 100 years. Companies like Sherwin-Williams, PPG, and Benjamin Moore generate their revenue not from the quality of their paint, but from the certainty of its failure. Their product development departments do not work to make paint last longer. They work to make paint last exactly long enough to justify the next purchase cycle. Short enough to guarantee repeat purchases within the lifespan of any home ownership. You cannot patent amorphous silicon dioxide because it is one of the most abundant naturally occurring compounds on Earth. And you absolutely cannot build a $200 billion annual paint market if every homeowner knows that a tablespoon of a $3 powder mixed into their existing paint will make that coating last the rest of their time in the house. The suppression of this knowledge was not achieved through a dramatic corporate conspiracy. It was achieved through institutional silence combined with curriculum control. By 1960, the American paint industry had successfully removed mineral additive recommendations from every major commercial painting manual published in the United States. Technical data sheets from paint manufacturers that had routinely included sections on performance-enhancing mineral additives up until the 1940s were quietly reformatted to exclude any reference to third-party powder additions. Professional painting contractor associations removed mineral additive protocols from their certification training programs within a single academic generation, and the consumer paint market was restructured around a simple and enormously profitable message: buy premium paint, trust the brand. The additive technology patented in most premium exterior paint formulations already includes silica-based compounds at concentrations and particle sizes controlled by the manufacturer. They took the $3 powder, ground it to a specific particle size distribution, mixed it into their premium formulation, and charged you a 40% price premium for a product whose primary performance improvement you could have added yourself for pennies per gallon. This is exactly what you should do. Go to any art supply store, ceramic supplier, or online bulk mineral retailer and buy fumed silica powder or precipitated silica. This costs between $10 and $20 for enough to treat 10 to 15 gallons of paint. You may also find it sold as a paint thickener or anti-settling agent in some hardware stores. Before opening your paint can, put on a dust mask, because fine silica powder should not be inhaled during the mixing process. Add exactly 1 tablespoon of silica powder per quart of paint, which equals 4 tablespoons per gallon. Do not exceed this ratio. The powder will disperse completely, and the mixture will appear identical to untreated paint, with no visible change in color or texture. Apply the treated paint using your standard method, brush, roller, or spray, following the same coverage rates and drying times indicated on the paint can label. The silicon dioxide modification does not change application behavior, drying time, or coverage rate. It only changes what happens at the molecular interface between the paint film and the surface during and after drying. Apply 2 coats as you normally would. The silica network forms during the initial curing period of the first coat and is reinforced with the application of the second coat. For interior surfaces, where longevity is less critical but improved adhesion is still valuable, use half the silica concentration to maintain the original gloss level of the paint. A retired house painter in rural Pennsylvania documented his use of this method over 40 years of professional work. He began adding fumed silica to his exterior paint formulations in 1981 after learning the technique from an elderly German immigrant craftsman who had used it since before World War II. He tracked 37 residential exterior paint jobs treated with the silica modification. By 2021, 22 of those jobs, ranging from 15 to 30 years since application, showed no peeling, chalking, or significant fading requiring repainting. The homeowners of those 22 properties saved an average of $10,000 each in avoided repainting costs compared to neighbors, whose standard paint jobs required repainting every 5 to 7 years. Some knowledge never truly disappears. It waits in the painted walls of a 1,000-year-old cliff dwelling in the Colorado desert, in the pages of an 1849 German mineralogy journal, and in the muscle memory of craftsmen who learned the formula before any paint manufacturer decided that your ignorance was more profitable than your knowledge. The Puebloan builders of Mesa Verde understood what Sherwin-Williams has spent more than a century making sure you never learned. Paint failure is not inevitable. It is designed. And the compound that prevents it has been sitting in volcanic deposits and beach sand since before the first human picked up a brush. If this changed how you see every can of paint in your garage and every wall in your house, subscribe and share this video now. Every share puts this knowledge back into the hands of someone who is still repainting their house every 5 years for a problem that has had a $3 solution for over 1,000 years.